Hello, everyone. Welcome. Tonight, we will discuss terrifying events, true stories that have occurred on this earth. Get comfortable, stay relaxed, and let's dive into it on Midnight Lullabies. Story 1. It was a Monday morning in Knoxville, Tennessee. A mother walks into her 16-year-old daughter's bedroom to wake her for school, but Emma Walker wouldn't be waking up. She was already gone. Shot in the head while she slept, in what first appeared to be a targeted, execution-style killing. There was no sign of forced entry. No shattered glass. No struggle. Just a quiet teenage girl in a quiet suburban neighborhood, murdered in the place she felt safest. The community was stunned. Emma was a cheerleader, an honor roll student. She didn't party. She had no enemies. And yet, someone had stood just outside her bedroom wall, and pulled the trigger. What makes a teenager commit the unthinkable, and why didn't anyone see it coming? This is the story of a relationship that looked like young love, until it turned into obsession. A boy who couldn't let go. And a girl who had no idea how much danger she was in. These are the final moments of Emma Walker, and the classmate who made sure she'd never leave her room again. To truly understand the depth of this tragedy, we must first know who Emma Walker was. Born on March 20, 2000, in Knoxville, Tennessee, Emma Jane Walker was the first child of Jill and Mark Walker. From an early age, Emma exhibited a compassionate and kind spirit, qualities that would define her throughout her life. As a freshman at Central High School, Emma joined the cheerleading squad, quickly becoming a standout member. Her dedication and enthusiasm were evident to all who knew her. Lauren Hutton, a senior cheerleader at the time, recalled, "Emma really took cheerleading seriously. She loved leading and she loved football games. She loved just being part of crowd appeal." But Emma was more than just a cheerleader. She was an honor student, actively involved in organizations like the Health Occupation Students of America, HOSA, the National Beta Club, and Young Life. Her aspirations were clear. She dreamed of becoming a neonatal nurse, a testament to her nurturing and caring nature. Friends and family remember Emma as someone who made everyone feel seen and valued. Her mother, Jill Walker, described her as a good friend, a good student. To us, she was our daughter and a sister. Just lots of things. Home videos capture Emma's radiant smile and infectious laughter, painting a picture of a young woman full of life and promise. Yet, beneath this vibrant exterior, Emma faced challenges that no one could have anticipated. She trusted someone who would ultimately betray that trust in the most unimaginable way. This is the story of Emma Walker, a life filled with hope and potential, tragically cut short by someone she once cared for. Knoxville, Tennessee, a city where the charm of Southern hospitality meets the serenity of the Appalachian landscape. Nestled in the eastern part of the state, Knoxville is home to over 190,000 residents. Its neighborhoods are adorned with historic homes, manicured lawns, and tree-lined streets that echo with the laughter of children and the hum of daily life. In the heart of this city lies the Fountain City neighborhood, a community that prides itself on its close-knit bonds and shared traditions. Here, neighbors know each other's names, and local events are communal affairs. It's a place where doors are often left unlocked, and the sense of security is almost palpable. Central High School stands as a pillar of this community. Established in 1906, it has witnessed generations of families pass through its halls. The school's red and black colors are a source of pride, and Friday night football games are events that draw the entire town together. But even in such idyllic settings, shadows can lurk. While Knoxville has experienced its share of challenges, certain neighborhoods have seen fluctuations in crime rates over the years. Yet, in Fountain City, violent crimes are rare, making any such incident deeply unsettling for its residents. The tranquility of this community was shattered when the unthinkable happened. A crime so heinous, it left the town grappling for answers, questioning the very fabric of their peaceful existence. To understand the depths of this tragic tale, we must delve into the relationship between Emma Walker and William Riley Gall, a bond that began with youthful infatuation but spiraled into a tumultuous and ultimately deadly liaison. Emma, a vivacious 14-year-old freshman cheerleader at Central High School in Knoxville, Tennessee, first crossed paths with Riley Gall, a 16-year-old junior and wide receiver on the school's football team, in 2014. Their connection was immediate, blossoming into a romantic relationship that would span 2 years. Friends and family initially observed a typical teenage romance, filled with shared moments and mutual affection. However, as time progressed, subtle yet alarming changes emerged. Riley's demeanor shifted. He became increasingly possessive, often expressing displeasure when Emma spent time with friends or engaged in activities without him. This controlling behavior did not go unnoticed. Emma's mother, Jill Walker, recounted instances where Riley would dictate Emma's attire and friendships, isolating her from her close-knit social circle. The relationship was marked by frequent breakups and reconciliations. Each separation was fraught with emotional turmoil, with Riley sending distressing messages. In one particularly unsettling text, he expressed a desire for Emma's death, stating he awaited the opportunity to read her obituary. Such messages deeply disturbed Emma's family, amplifying their concerns about the nature of the relationship. Classmates and friends bore witness to the volatility. They noted the once cheerful and outgoing Emma becoming more reserved, her radiant spirit dimmed by the weight of the relationship strain. Despite attempts to sever ties, Emma found herself ensnared in a cycle of manipulation and emotional coercion. In November 2016, Emma made the resolute decision to end the relationship definitively. Riley did not take this well. He resorted to drastic measures to regain her attention. On one occasion, he staged his own kidnapping, sending anonymous messages to Emma, claiming he was in dire danger. Emma, though initially alarmed, soon discerned the fabrication, further eroding her trust in him. Friends recall Emma's growing apprehension. One confidant shared, "They weren't talking, but we never thought it was that serious." The undercurrents of Riley's obsession were becoming more pronounced, setting the stage for an outcome no one could have anticipated. Unbeknownst to many, Riley harbored a secret, a darkness that was festering, poised to shatter the lives entwined in this tragic narrative. On Sunday, November 20th, 2016, Emma Walker began her day like any other. The 16-year-old junior at Central High School in Knoxville, Tennessee, was known for her radiant smile and unwavering enthusiasm. That morning, she attended a local church service with her mother, Jill Walker. The two shared a close bond, often spending Sundays together in reflection and family activities. After the service, Emma and Jill returned home, where they enjoyed a quiet afternoon. Emma spent time studying for upcoming exams and chatting with friends over text messages and social media. Her cheerful demeanor gave no indication of any underlying concerns. In the early evening, Emma informed her mother that she planned to attend a gathering with friends from school. Given Emma's responsible nature and the family's trust in her judgment, Jill saw no reason for concern. Emma left the house around 5:30 p.m., dressed casually, her phone in hand as she exchanged messages with friends. Throughout the evening, Emma's phone activity was consistent with her usual patterns, texting friends, sharing updates on social media, and responding to messages promptly. Around 6:15 p.m., she sent a Snapchat message to a close friend, sharing a light-hearted moment from the gathering. At approximately 6:45 p.m., Emma's digital presence abruptly ceased. Messages sent to her remained unread, and attempts to call her went straight to voicemail. Friends at the gathering noted that Emma had stepped outside to take a phone call earlier but hadn't returned. Assuming she had gone home or to meet someone privately, they thought little of it at the time. Concerned by the sudden silence, Jill attempted to reach Emma multiple times throughout the night. As hours passed without any response, unease settled over the Walker household. The following morning, at 6:30 a.m., Jill entered Emma's bedroom to wake her for school. She found Emma lying in her bed, appearing to be asleep. However, upon closer inspection, Jill realized something was terribly wrong. Emma was unresponsive. Panicked, Jill immediately dialed 911. The dispatcher guided her through CPR procedures until emergency responders arrived. Despite their efforts, Emma was pronounced dead at the scene. The initial assessment revealed no visible signs of trauma, leaving the cause of death unclear. As investigators began to piece together the events of Emma's final hours, they uncovered a series of alarming incidents and messages that would shed light on the tragic outcome. The seemingly ordinary Sunday had ended in an unimaginable loss, leaving a community in mourning and searching for answers. In the early hours of November 21, 2016, the tranquil Sterkey Hills neighborhood in Knoxville, Tennessee, was shattered by an unthinkable tragedy. Emma Walker, a 16-year-old Central High School junior, was found lifeless in her bedroom by her mother, Jill Walker, who had gone to wake her for school. Initially, there were no overt signs of foul play, no forced entry, no visible disturbances. But upon closer inspection, a chilling discovery was made: a small hole in the wall adjacent to Emma's bed, precisely aligned with where her head rested. Investigators quickly realized this was no accident. A bullet had been fired from outside the house, penetrating the wall and striking Emma behind her left ear as she slept. Another bullet hole was found in a different part of the house, approximately the same height as the first, with the bullet lodged in her pillow. Outside, 2 shell casings were recovered, indicating the shots had been deliberately aimed into the home from the yard. The absence of a weapon at the scene and the calculated nature of the shooting left detectives with more questions than answers. Who could have committed such a deliberate act, and why? As they began to piece together the events leading up to Emma's death, a crucial lead emerged from her digital footprint. Examination of Emma's phone revealed that the last person she had been in contact with was her ex-boyfriend, William Riley Gall. Their relationship had recently ended, and friends reported that Gall had exhibited troubling behavior following the breakup. This revelation prompted investigators to delve deeper into Gall's actions and mindset in the days preceding the tragedy. What they uncovered would unravel a harrowing tale of obsession, deception, and a lethal determination that culminated in the untimely death of a promising young woman. In the wake of Emma Walker's tragic death, investigators delved deep into her personal relationships to uncover potential motives and suspects. Central to their inquiry was Emma's recent breakup with her ex-boyfriend, William Riley Gall, an 18-year-old freshman at Maryville College and former football player at Central High School. Friends and family recounted a tumultuous 2-year relationship between Emma and Riley, marked by frequent breakups and reconciliations. Emma's parents had grown increasingly concerned about Riley's possessive behavior, noting instances where he sought to control whom Emma could see and where she could go. This controlling demeanor ultimately led Emma to end the relationship for good in early November 2016. Despite the breakup, Riley's attempts to communicate with Emma didn't cease. Friends reported that he employed various tactics to regain her attention, some of which were alarmingly deceptive. On one occasion, he sent anonymous messages to Emma, claiming that someone she knew had been kidnapped. Concerned and frightened, Emma later discovered Riley lying in a ditch near her friend's house, alleging he had been abducted, a claim that raised suspicions among those close to her. In the days leading up to Emma's death, unsettling events continued to unfold. Surveillance footage from her neighborhood captured a figure dressed in black lurking near her home. On one particular night, Emma reported hearing persistent knocking on her bedroom window and door, further heightening her anxiety. She confided in friends about these incidents, expressing fear and uncertainty about the identity of the mysterious individual. Investigators also uncovered Riley's online activities, which painted a picture of a young man grappling with the breakup. He posted numerous messages on social media expressing his love for Emma and his devastation over their split. In one tweet, he wrote, "Living every day through Emma Walker. I love you, beautiful, and I know you're in a better place now." These public displays of grief contrasted sharply with the private turmoil and manipulative behaviors reported by those close to the couple. As detectives pieced together this digital and behavioral evidence, a clearer picture emerged of a young man unwilling to accept the end of his relationship, resorting to increasingly desperate and alarming measures. The culmination of these actions would soon lead investigators to a chilling conclusion about the events that transpired on the night of Emma Walker's death. The tension in the investigation had reached a boiling point. After weeks of unraveling digital trails, eyewitness accounts, and behavioral patterns, authorities had finally gathered enough to bring in their primary suspect, William Riley Gall. It was a cold morning when Riley was brought into the police station for questioning. He walked into the room with his usual calm demeanor, but it was evident something had changed. The world around him was closing in, and his time of evasion was up. The same young man who once professed his love for Emma now found himself in the crosshairs of a murder investigation. At first, Riley denied everything. He sat in that sterile interrogation room, maintaining his innocence with quiet conviction. He claimed he had nothing to do with Emma's death, nothing at all. His eyes darted from side to side, avoiding the gaze of the detectives as they laid out the overwhelming evidence. But then came the bombshell. The DNA on Emma's clothing, under her nails, matched Riley's. It was an unmistakable link, the kind of evidence that could shatter even the most defiant of defenses. When confronted with the undeniable truth, Riley's expression remained unreadable. He sat back in his chair, his eyes staring blankly into space. He didn't flinch, didn't react. He said nothing. The room was thick with tension. The sound of the clock ticking seemed to echo louder, each second dragging on like an eternity. The investigators waited, hoping for some sign of remorse, some crack in his icy facade. But there was nothing. Riley just stared, a haunting silence that seemed to stretch on forever. The moment hung in the air. A slight shift in Riley's posture suggested the gravity of the situation was sinking in, but still, no words. The detectives pressed him once more, asking him to come clean, to show some sign of humanity, but Riley remained unmoved. The realization was clear, he was either too far gone to feel guilt, or perhaps he had already made his peace with the decision he'd made. Finally, the decision was made. The arrest was imminent. The silence in that room was broken only by the sound of handcuffs being fastened, the cold metal snapping into place, securing the young man whose obsession had turned fatal. Riley Gall was officially under arrest for the first-degree murder of Emma Walker. The haunting silence of the interrogation room followed Riley all the way to the jail cell. As detectives prepared to present their case in court, the enormity of what had occurred began to settle in, a young life full of potential, snuffed out by the very person she had once trusted. Riley Gall, someone Emma had known and loved, was the one who ended her life. The arrest was just the beginning, though. The pieces of the puzzle were now falling into place, but the full extent of Riley's involvement, and the dark undercurrent of his actions, would only be revealed in the trial to come. The arrest of Riley Gall sent shockwaves through the small town of Knoxville, Tennessee. The community, once known for its quiet streets and tight-knit relationships, was now forever changed. Emma Walker, a young woman with dreams, had been taken too soon, and the boy who once smiled at her in the halls of high school was now accused of ending her life. In the days following Emma's death, a collective grief gripped the town. The high school she had attended, and the streets she had once walked with ease, became the stage for a series of emotional tributes. Candlelight vigils flickered in the night air, drawing students, teachers, and parents alike, each of them trying to process the unimaginable. At those vigils, Emma's classmates would often share stories of the girl who was more than just a student. She was a friend, a confidant. A girl with a radiant smile who made everyone feel like they belonged. There was no one quite like Emma. And yet, no one had seen the danger coming. No one had noticed the slow and dark shift in the relationship between her and Riley. And now, in the wake of her death, that was a question no one could stop asking. But for Emma's parents, the grief cut deeper than anyone could imagine. They had raised Emma to be kind, to trust, to love. But the person she had trusted most, the person she had let into her life, was the one who took her from them. In an emotional statement, Emma's mother, Cheryl Walker, spoke to the media, her voice shaking with pain. She trusted him. That's what hurts the most. She believed in him, and he took that from her. He took her away from us. Her words echoed through the hearts of everyone who had known Emma, as the emotional fallout of her death became more than just a local tragedy. It was a reminder of how fragile trust can be, and how quickly it can be shattered. Riley's trial began a few months later. The court was packed with people who had once known him, friends, family, even classmates who had witnessed the unraveling of his relationship with Emma. The courtroom was a theater of tension, filled with pain, anger, and disbelief. Riley, now sitting in the defendant's chair, appeared as calm and composed as ever. His eyes seemed empty, his face unreadable. He had pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. He denied everything, claiming that he was not involved in Emma's death. But the evidence against him was overwhelming: DNA, eyewitness accounts, digital footprints that tracked his every move the day Emma died. As the trial progressed, testimonies from Emma's friends painted a portrait of a girl who was loved by all, and of a young man whose quiet manipulation had gone unnoticed for far too long. There were emotional breakdowns in the courtroom. Emma's friends, who had once shared their secrets with her, were now forced to relive their final memories with her. They spoke of the girl they had lost, and the friend who had been betrayed by someone she once considered close. But the most shocking moments came when Sarah Miller, Riley's ex-girlfriend, took the stand. She described how Riley had become more and more obsessed with Emma, and how his jealousy and bitterness had turned into something darker. She spoke of how, after their breakup, Riley's behavior had grown more erratic, and how he had made disturbing comments about Emma. It was clear to everyone in that courtroom that Emma had been trapped in a toxic web of manipulation, a web woven by someone who was supposed to be her friend. But now, as the trial neared its end, there was one question that remained: would justice be served? The jury deliberated for just 5 hours, but in that short time, they reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read aloud. Riley Gall stood still, his expression never changing, as he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Emma's family, it was a small victory, but it didn't bring her back. It didn't undo the pain they had felt every day since she had vanished. As the gavel came down, Emma's parents held on to each other, knowing that while the trial was over, their journey of healing was just beginning. In the years that followed, the small town of Knoxville would never forget the tragedy that had shaken it to its core. Emma Walker's name would be spoken in reverence, her memory cherished by all who had known her. And as the town slowly recovered, one thing remained clear: no one would ever forget the girl who had been taken too soon by the one person she had trusted the most. The aftermath of Emma's death would live on in the hearts of her friends and family forever. The courtroom may have delivered justice, but it would never undo the pain. And though Riley Gall had been found guilty, the question remained: how could someone who had been so close to Emma have betrayed her so completely? The answer, perhaps, will always be the hardest part of this story to understand. This is the story of a life lost, and the emotional ripple effects that will never fade. The courtroom was still, every eye locked on Riley Gall as he stood for sentencing. The months of investigation, the overwhelming evidence, the testimonies, and the damning digital trail, each piece of the puzzle had been laid bare. Riley had been convicted, but as the judge prepared to pronounce his sentence, a chilling air hung over the room. The real question lingered: was this a cold, calculated act of murder? Or was it the tragic result of a fractured mind unraveling? Riley's parents, who had once stood by their son, now sat in silence. His friends, who had once believed in his innocence, could not look away from the boy who had once been one of their own. Riley, his face a mask of indifference, appeared to have no emotion as the sentence was handed down. Riley Gall was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The room was heavy with emotion as the judge's gavel struck down. But as Riley was escorted from the courtroom, his fate sealed, the whispers began. Questions that had once been confined to the walls of the courtroom now reverberated throughout the town, in the homes of Emma's friends, in the hearts of her grieving family. Was Riley's act of violence premeditated? Was this a deliberate plan from the very beginning? Or had he simply snapped under the pressure of emotions he couldn't control? No one could say for sure. Some, like Emma's family, believed it was an act of calculated malice, an end to a friendship marred by obsession, jealousy, and manipulation. Others, however, weren't so certain. They wondered if Riley had been a victim himself, a victim of his own tortured mind. Had something inside him broken? Or had his toxic relationship with Emma pushed him to the breaking point? As the weeks passed after the trial, new revelations began to surface, ones that would add another layer of complexity to an already horrific story. Friends of Riley came forward with disturbing new details. Some mentioned seeing signs of trouble long before the murder. His increasingly erratic behavior, strange comments about Emma, and troubling online posts all pointed to a young man in distress, struggling to deal with emotions he didn't know how to express. But no one had ever imagined it would lead to this. No one had ever guessed that a relationship, one that began with innocent friendship, could end in such devastating violence. Riley's own statements to investigators painted a chilling picture of his state of mind, but they also raised more questions than answers. In an interview with law enforcement, Riley spoke of feeling isolated, of being misunderstood. He told them that he had loved Emma more than anyone ever could, that he had been tormented by her decision to break up with him, and that he couldn't bear to see her move on. His words were filled with pain, but there was a coldness too, a chilling detachment that made it difficult for anyone to truly understand his motives. Had he been driven by jealousy? Or was this something deeper? For Emma's parents, the revelations only deepened the agony. They were left to wonder whether their daughter's tragic fate had been sealed from the moment she had let Riley into her life. The haunting truth lingered in their minds. Had Emma seen the signs? Had she known how dangerous Riley had become? Or was she just a young girl who trusted the wrong person? As the community continued to mourn, new details of Riley's past were revealed, small clues that painted a portrait of a troubled young man who had struggled with his emotions for years. His family, once supportive of him, began to share stories of their own attempts to get him help. Riley had sought therapy in the months leading up to Emma's death. He had talked about his struggles with anger, with feelings of abandonment, and with a sense of betrayal by those closest to him. But despite these efforts, no one had been able to prevent what would ultimately unfold. His therapist said in an interview, "It's difficult to know exactly what was going through Riley's mind, but it's clear that there were deep-seated issues. He was struggling with intense feelings of rejection and inadequacy. His relationship with Emma had become an obsession for him, and sometimes, when someone is unable to process those emotions, it can lead to drastic and dangerous outcomes." These revelations only fueled the debate. Was Riley Gall a cold-blooded murderer, or a young man who simply could not control his emotional turmoil? Was it premeditated violence? Or was it the tragic result of a broken mind, one that had been pushed too far by the weight of his obsession? For many, the answer would never be clear. And perhaps that was the most unsettling part of it all. No matter how many facts were unearthed, no matter how many interviews or experts weighed in, the truth remained elusive. Was Emma's death an act of deliberate malice, or had it been something that Riley could not control? And as the years went by, the haunting questions persisted. What happens when a friendship, once so full of promise, collapses into something darker? What happens when trust is shattered, and the person you thought you knew becomes someone unrecognizable? There were no answers. There were only whispers. And the memory of Emma Walker, her life, her laughter, her warmth, would forever linger in the hearts of all who knew her. This was a tragedy of immeasurable loss, a loss felt not only by Emma's family, but by a community that would never be the same again. As the finality of the case set in, many found themselves asking, could this tragedy have been prevented? Or was it simply the inevitable result of emotions that no one could have foreseen? In the end, the trial may have ended, but the answers, like the pain left behind, remained unanswered. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling reality of all. Emma Walker's name lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, a bright light snuffed out too soon. As for Riley Gall, his story continues behind the walls of a prison cell, and with it, the haunting question that may never be answered: what drives someone to murder the one they once loved? Teenagers fight. Friendships end. It's a part of growing up. But no one, ever expects it to turn into a nightmare. The quiet streets of Knoxville, once a symbol of peace and serenity, now stand as a reminder of a tragedy that could never have been predicted. For Emma's family, for her friends, and for everyone who knew her, there is an undeniable truth that still lingers. How did it happen? How did a simple disagreement, a falling out between friends, escalate into something so horrifying? The camera lingers on a photo of Emma, a bright-eyed teenager with a hopeful smile, forever frozen in time. Her eyes, once full of promise, are now an eternal reminder of a life cut short. A life taken too soon. The life of a girl who had everything ahead of her, who was loved by so many, and who trusted the wrong person. In the months and years since Emma's death, those who knew her have had to come to terms with the reality of the situation. Some still look at Riley Gall, the young man who took her life, and wonder how it all went so terribly wrong. Was it something he could have controlled? Was it something Emma could have prevented? In an interview with a local teacher, she said, "It's hard to wrap your head around it. These kids were part of the same community. They went to school together, they hung out together. No one expected anything like this. They were just kids. But sometimes, that's all it takes. A moment of anger, a fractured friendship, and everything changes in an instant." The haunting truth is this: could it have been stopped? Could Emma have seen the danger before it was too late? Could Riley have reached out for the help he so clearly needed before things spiraled out of control? Emma's mother said, "I keep asking myself that question every single day. Could I have done something differently? Could I have seen the signs? We were just a family, living our life. And now? I don't know. It's a question I'll never have an answer to." And that, perhaps, is the most chilling takeaway from this entire tragedy, the nagging thought that hangs over everyone who was involved. Was it inevitable? Or could it have been prevented? Could Riley have been stopped before he made the decision that would change everything? Could Emma have seen the red flags and distanced herself from someone who, in the end, became a predator? In the quiet moments of reflection, those who knew Emma can only wonder if this is a cautionary tale, a reminder that sometimes, even the closest relationships hide darkness beneath the surface. A lesson learned too late, for Emma, for Riley, and for everyone whose lives were irrevocably altered that night in October. As the camera zooms out from Emma's photo, the question echoes in the air, unanswered and haunting. Could it have been stopped? The story of Emma Walker is a stark reminder that, in life, even the most ordinary moments can spiral into chaos. A friendship ends, a fight begins, and before you know it, everything you knew is shattered. The pain, the loss, the unanswered questions, they'll never go away. And the haunting truth remains: sometimes, a fight between friends doesn't just end in hurt feelings. It can end in tragedy. And in the aftermath, all we're left with is the silence, and the question of what might have been. In memory of Emma Walker. Story 2. Imagine a young mother, full of hope and dreams, pregnant with her second child, ready to begin a new chapter in her life. She has everything ahead of her: her 2-year-old son, Caden, a playful toddler with a smile that could light up any room, and the man she thought she could trust. But then, in the blink of an eye, everything shatters. In what should have been a joyful time, this family's world collapses, leaving nothing but heartbreak and unanswered questions. A horrifying tragedy strikes, one that no one could have ever predicted. Kaylin and Caden Johnson's lives, once filled with promise, are stolen away by someone who should have protected them. But how did it happen? And who could commit such a devastating act against those they were meant to love? This is the haunting, chilling story of betrayal, loss, and a community left to pick up the pieces. Kaylin Johnson was only 24 years old when her life was tragically cut short. A vibrant woman with a heart full of dreams, she had her entire future ahead of her. Kaylin was no stranger to hard work, and her love for her family was boundless. Pregnant with her second child, she was eager to raise her family, to build a home filled with love and joy. Her 2-year-old son, Caden, was the center of her world. A lively, curious toddler, Caden had a smile that could melt anyone's heart. His giggles echoed through the house, his energy was infectious, and his bright future seemed limitless. Kaylin and Caden had so much to look forward to, a life brimming with promise. In a small town, where everyone knew each other's name, their lives seemed perfect, idyllic even. But that perfection would soon be shattered. Enter Brennan Murphy, a 23-year-old man who seemed like a perfect fit for the role of a loving partner and stepfather to Caden. At first, Brennan appeared to be the man Kaylin had always dreamed of, a caring, supportive partner who would help her raise her son, and eventually, their new baby. The couple had been together for a couple of years, and from the outside, everything seemed picture perfect. Brennan was described by those who knew him as someone who cared for Kaylin and Caden, someone who was always around and present, seemingly dedicated to their happiness. But behind the doors of their home, things were not as they appeared. Unbeknownst to Kaylin and those around her, Brennan's true nature was far darker than anyone could have ever imagined. Kaylin, Brennan, and little Caden lived in a small, tight-knit community. It wasn't a place that saw a lot of crime or drama. It was the kind of town where everyone knew their neighbors, where children played outside in the streets, and families gathered for weekend barbecues. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect place to raise a family. Kaylin had deep roots there, a support system of friends and family who were always close by, offering help when needed. She'd often tell her friends how happy she was to finally have a partner who understood her, who would love her son just as much as he loved her. Life was simple and, for the most part, good. But what no one could have known was that beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, something was terribly wrong. The darkness that would soon engulf this family had been quietly creeping in. The connection between Kaylin and Brennan, once thought to be built on trust and love, would soon unravel, leading to a tragic and unimaginable end. As time passed, subtle cracks began to show in Brennan and Kaylin's relationship. At first, the signs were so small, so seemingly insignificant, that they could have easily been overlooked. But those who were close to the couple began to notice. What was once a loving and carefree relationship seemed to be shifting. The spark that had ignited their romance seemed to flicker, replaced by moments of tension and frustration. Brennan, who had once been warm, charming, and supportive, had slowly become more irritable. His occasional outbursts at seemingly trivial things caught people off guard. Kaylin, who always had a calming presence, would try to diffuse these moments, but Brennan's temper would flare in unpredictable ways. He would snap over small things like the dinner not being ready on time or Caden's innocent mischief. His irritability seemed to grow day by day, but it wasn't something Kaylin was ready to face. She'd brush it off, telling herself it was just stress. Stress from work. Stress from the upcoming arrival of their second child. After all, they were about to expand their family, and everyone experiences pressure in those moments, right? Yet, something felt off. Kaylin couldn't shake the feeling that Brennan wasn't just stressed, there was something darker under the surface. Friends who had known the couple for years began to notice that Kaylin's once bright smile seemed to fade a little more each day. She wasn't her usual self. She'd confide in close friends that she was worried, but always followed it with, "It'll pass. Things will get better." But deep down, she feared it wouldn't. It was a quiet day in their small, close-knit community. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. Birds chirped in the trees, and children played in the streets, their laughter ringing through the air. To an outsider, everything appeared calm, almost idyllic. It was a typical day for Kaylin and Caden. Kaylin, 7 months pregnant, had spent the morning picking up a few last-minute items for the baby, while Caden ran around, playing with his toys and laughing at every little thing. He was an energetic toddler, full of life and wonder, and to his mother, he was the brightest star in her universe. That morning, Kaylin had been looking forward to spending the day relaxing at home, preparing for the arrival of their new baby. She was excited, nervous, and, like any expectant mother, focused on the future. But Brennan, who had been quieter than usual, made a comment that gave Kaylin pause. She didn't think much of it at first, but later she would wish she had listened more carefully. Brennan had muttered something about needing to get away for a while. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. He had occasionally taken Caden on little outings, but this time, Kaylin couldn't shake the feeling that something felt off. His voice was curt, distant, as if he was just going through the motions. After a quick lunch, Kaylin decided to take a nap, as she'd been feeling tired lately. She asked Brennan to take Caden out for a drive to give her a little rest. At first, Brennan hesitated, then quickly agreed. He had promised to be back in a couple of hours. Caden, excited for the trip, ran to grab his little shoes, oblivious to the tension that was beginning to bubble under the surface. As Caden kissed his mom goodbye, she smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something in her gut, a nagging feeling, but she tried to shake it off. It was just a feeling. After all, nothing was wrong. Everything would be fine, right? But Brennan's behavior as they left was different. There was something in his eyes, a coldness that Kaylin hadn't noticed before. It lingered in the way he said goodbye, his voice almost mechanical. But she couldn't place it at the time. She wouldn't realize the significance until later. As the hours passed, the peaceful routine of their home grew eerily silent. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, but no one returned. Kaylin, thinking nothing of it, fell into a deep sleep. She never knew that in those hours, everything, her world, her family, was about to be shattered beyond recognition. Little did anyone know, this seemingly ordinary day, one full of routine and quiet moments, would end in unspeakable tragedy. What seemed like an innocent drive to the park, a simple errand for a father and his son, would soon take a dark turn. This day would change the course of Kaylin and Caden's lives forever, and the tiny, peaceful town where they lived would never be the same again. What happened in those final hours still sends chills through those who were closest to the family. And as the clock ticked on, a horrific tragedy loomed just out of sight, its shadow stretching over the quiet streets, waiting to engulf everything in its wake. It was a scene that no one could have imagined, a quiet, unsuspecting day that turned into a nightmare for everyone involved. After an argument that had grown increasingly heated, Brennan's emotions reached a boiling point. According to reports from People.com, the dispute began with something trivial, but in the emotional chaos of the moment, it quickly escalated. They were in the parking lot of their apartment complex, a place that had witnessed countless ordinary moments in their lives, grocery store runs, playful exchanges between Kaylin and Caden, and Brennan's smiles when he was in a good mood. But today, the parking lot was the scene of something unthinkable. Witnesses who were in the area later described hearing raised voices, but by the time they thought to intervene, it was too late. In a fit of rage, Brennan drew a firearm. It wasn't something Kaylin had ever anticipated. The man who had promised to be her protector now turned on her in the most horrific way possible. The gunshot rang out, a sharp, terrifying sound that shattered the calm of the afternoon. Kaylin crumpled to the ground, a pool of blood forming around her in the parking lot. But it didn't end there. Brennan wasn't done. The rage that had overtaken him clouded his judgment and his humanity. He dragged Kaylin's lifeless body from the parking lot, using the cover of nearby woods to conceal her remains, as if attempting to erase the existence of a mother who had once been so full of promise. As if this weren't enough, the nightmare continued. With Kaylin's body abandoned and hidden, Brennan turned his attention to Caden. The 2-year-old boy, blissfully unaware of the horror that had just unfolded, was still in the car. Caden's bright, innocent smile would be the last thing his mother would ever see. Brennan then drove off with Caden, heading toward the central thruway, a bridge that would forever mark the end of the toddler's life. The cold, freezing waters below would claim him, just as the icy grip of Brennan's own twisted emotions had claimed the life of his partner. The details are chilling. According to multiple news outlets, including Fox 8 Live, Brennan stopped his car at the edge of the bridge. He opened the door, as if performing a task with mechanical precision. Without hesitation, without remorse, he tossed the small, fragile body of Caden over the railing. His lifeless form plummeted into the dark, freezing waters below, where hypothermia would take him from the world that morning. Caden's body was discovered hours later, a tragic reminder of the boy who was full of life but was now the victim of a senseless, heart-wrenching crime. The community, which had once known him as a bright, energetic toddler, was left in disbelief. How could such a thing happen? In the aftermath, Brennan's actions were calculated, as if he were trying to cover his tracks, as though trying to rewrite the script of what had just transpired. After committing such unspeakable acts, the last thing he wanted was for the world to know the truth. For a time, he played the part of the concerned stepfather, the grieving partner. He began to fabricate a story, a version of events that would shield him from suspicion. According to sources at KPLC-TV, Brennan concocted a tale that involved an accident. He claimed that Kaylin had been involved in a dispute, that there had been a struggle, and that in the midst of everything, she had gotten hurt. As for Caden, Brennan told police that the boy had somehow gone missing, possibly wandering off in the cold. But no one was buying his lies. Authorities weren't fooled by the story he spun, and as hours passed, it became clear that Brennan's facade was beginning to crack. His initial attempts to cover up the crime only drew suspicion, and it wasn't long before investigators started to piece together the truth. A few days later, the authorities would have enough to confront him about the inconsistencies in his account. The weight of his actions must have begun to sink in. He couldn't outrun the truth forever. It was the confession that would leave everyone stunned, an admission so raw, so filled with anguish, that it seemed to change the entire landscape of this already tragic case. Brennan Murphy, who had once been seen as a caring partner and stepfather, finally cracked under the pressure. In a moment of clarity, or perhaps guilt, he confessed to what he had done. According to sources like People.com and KPLC-TV, Brennan's confession was chilling. Sitting with law enforcement, he detailed, in cold and emotionless terms, how he had killed Kaylin. How in a rage, he had shot her in the parking lot and then callously disposed of her body like it was nothing. The horror in his confession deepened when he admitted to throwing Caden off the bridge. He even described how he had watched the boy fall into the water, and the way the tiny body disappeared beneath the surface. The confession was a gut-wrenching moment for everyone involved. His admission wasn't filled with tears or regret. Instead, it was almost robotic, as if he had detached from the weight of his crimes. Authorities, investigators, and even those who had known Brennan for years were left in shock. How could this man, who had once been part of a family, someone who seemed so normal, be capable of such violence? It was a chilling end to a story that had begun with so much promise. A young family, a future ahead of them, shattered in an instant. Brennan's confession, as detailed and cold as it was, finally unraveled the mystery of Kaylin and Caden's tragic deaths. With Brennan behind bars and the investigation into the deaths of Kaylin and Caden continuing, the community was left to grapple with the unbearable weight of the loss. Their deaths were a reminder of the darkness that could hide behind a smile, of how easily a life could be taken without warning. As the trial approached, and more details about the case came to light, the question remained, why? What drove a man, seemingly full of promise, to commit such unspeakable acts? And how could a mother and child, whose lives had been filled with love and joy, end in such a horrifying way? The answers were yet to come. And as the families of Kaylin and Caden tried to find a way to move forward, the memory of this tragedy would haunt everyone involved. The pain, the loss, and the unanswered questions would linger, long after the courtroom lights had dimmed. After Brennan's shocking confession, the legal system moved swiftly, though the consequences of his actions were anything but easy to comprehend. The news of his arrest, followed by his guilty plea, sent ripples through the community and beyond. Brennan Murphy had taken the first step in accepting responsibility for the lives he had stolen, but for many, it was too little, too late. Brennan pleaded guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter and 1 count of first-degree feticide, admitting to the killing of Kaylin and the tragic death of her unborn child, whose life was snuffed out before it had even begun. In the eyes of the law, manslaughter was the charge that would bring him a sentence, but even with a plea deal in place, the weight of his actions could not be softened. As reported by People.com and Fox 8 Live, Brennan was facing a maximum sentence of 95 years in prison, an attempt to balance the scales of justice for lives destroyed. The charges alone were staggering, but the emotional cost of this crime could never be measured in terms of years. Kaylin and Caden's deaths had left a scar on everyone who knew them. Their vibrant lives, snuffed out in an instant, had created an emptiness that would never be filled. In a courtroom that day, people waited, some in tears, others with anger in their hearts. The promise of justice for Kaylin and Caden was in the air, but it could never undo the horror that had unfolded. As the trial moved forward, the sentencing phase was perhaps the most emotionally charged part of the entire legal process. Victim impact statements filled the air, with family and friends of Kaylin and Caden taking the stand to express their grief, anger, and heartache. These were the voices of the people who had known Kaylin since childhood, the family members who had raised her, and those who had witnessed the innocence and joy of little Caden. They spoke of the woman Kaylin had been, vibrant, full of life, a young mother with a bright future. They remembered her infectious laughter, her ambition, and her love for her family. They spoke of her dreams for the future, dreams that had been cruelly taken away by the man she had trusted. They spoke of Caden, her beloved 2-year-old son, whose life was cut tragically short. One of the most heart-wrenching moments was when Kaylin's mother took the stand. Her voice cracked with emotion as she described the pain of losing her daughter in such a brutal and senseless manner. She spoke of the hope that Kaylin had carried for her unborn child, a hope that had been ripped away in an instant. The room fell silent as she poured out her soul, each word an anguished plea for justice. As the emotional weight of these testimonies settled in, Brennan's defense team attempted to paint a picture of a man who had been struggling, one who had faced personal demons and emotional turmoil. They claimed that his actions were a result of mental distress, a plea for leniency, hoping that some sense of humanity could be found in the man who had done the unthinkable. But for those who had lost Kaylin and Caden, these words fell flat. There could be no explanation, no reasoning that would make sense of the brutality of what had occurred. In the end, Brennan was sentenced to 70 years in prison for the 2 counts of manslaughter and an additional 25 years for the first-degree feticide charge. While this sentence brought some closure to the case, it did little to heal the wounds left by his horrific actions. The sentencing felt like a hollow victory for those left behind, as the families of Kaylin and Caden were forced to confront the devastating fact that no amount of time would ever bring them back. The impact of this crime went far beyond the confines of the courtroom. The community where Kaylin and Caden had lived, a small and tight-knit town, was forever changed. In a place where everyone knew each other, the pain of their loss was shared by all. For many, it was unfathomable to think that a tragedy of this magnitude could occur in their own backyard. Neighbors who had once exchanged pleasantries with Brennan were left grappling with the horrifying realization that they had been living just steps away from a monster. For those who knew Kaylin, the loss was even more profound. She had been a daughter, a sister, a mother, and her absence was felt by everyone who had been touched by her light. Caden, too, had been a source of joy in the community. His carefree laughter and innocence had been a reminder of the future, of hope, and of what could have been. His death left an entire town mourning the loss of a child who had yet to live a full life. For Kaylin's family, the tragedy was a pain that could not be quantified. They were forced to reckon with the unbearable loss of both mother and child, taken from them in the most cruel and heartless way. In interviews with local media outlets like WAFB, Kaylin's parents expressed their overwhelming grief, as well as their commitment to ensuring that their daughter and grandson would never be forgotten. As the months passed, the small community came together to support one another. Candlelight vigils, memorial services, and tributes were held in honor of Kaylin and Caden. But despite the unity, the scars left by this tragedy would never fully heal. The community had been irrevocably changed. The dream of a young woman and her child had been shattered in the blink of an eye, and the reverberations of that pain would be felt for generations to come. As we close this chapter of the story of Kaylin and Caden, we are left with more questions than answers. Why did this happen? How could someone who was trusted with their lives turn on them in such a horrific way? In the search for answers, we are reminded that some tragedies are beyond explanation. Some acts of violence are not just crimes, they are a tragic reminder of the darkness that can lie within even those closest to us. For Kaylin's family, and for the community that knew and loved her, the pain will never truly fade. The memories of her laughter, of the joy that she brought to every room, will stay with them forever. And for Caden, whose life was full of potential, whose future was snatched away before he could even begin to live it, his memory will endure as well. The story of Kaylin and Caden Johnson serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the evil that can be hiding in plain sight. It is a story that will never be forgotten, one that will continue to echo in the hearts and minds of those who knew them. As we reflect on this tragic tale, we honor their memory and the lives they could have lived. Story 3. Imagine carrying a secret so dark, so devastating, that every single day of your life feels like a countdown to the moment the truth will finally break free. Now picture living with that secret for 25 years, never speaking of it, never acknowledging it, yet knowing that it's there, buried deep within. A secret so carefully hidden, no one suspects a thing. But what if, after all those years of living a lie, the truth was uncovered, without warning? What if the secret you thought you had buried forever came rushing to the surface, shocking everyone around you, and leaving you to wonder how you ever thought you could get away with it? Joanne Sharkey was a mother, a daughter, a sister, living what seemed like a normal life. But behind closed doors, there was something far more sinister, an act so horrific, so chilling, it would haunt everyone who came to know about it. In 1998, a newborn baby, wrapped in black bags, was found abandoned in a remote part of Warrington, England. Authorities were baffled. No leads, no clues, just a tragedy that seemed like a mystery with no end. But for 25 years, the truth was hidden. Joanne, a woman no one would suspect, carried the weight of a dark secret. She had killed her own child, the child no one knew she had, and for over 2 decades, she kept her dark past a secret. No one suspected a thing, until 2023. What would drive a mother to such lengths to conceal a crime so cruel? What is the story behind her desperate attempt to keep her secret buried, and why did she think she could get away with it? Stay with us, because this chilling story only gets darker from here. November 1998. It was a morning like any other in the quiet, unassuming town of Warrington, England. The air was damp with the cold of autumn, the fog blanketing the streets as it often did this time of year. But that morning would be anything but ordinary. A passerby, out for an early walk through a secluded woodland area, noticed something strange by the side of the path. At first, it didn't make sense. It was just a heap of discarded rubbish, or so it seemed. But as the figure drew closer, the truth became all too clear. Wrapped tightly in black garbage bags, a lifeless baby lay abandoned in the woods, its small body cold to the touch. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. A newborn, found dead, left to be forgotten in the cold, damp earth. No one could understand how or why such a thing had happened. But this wasn't just any abandoned child. This was a baby, a helpless, innocent life, that had been deliberately discarded in the most gruesome and heartless manner. Baby Callum, as he would later be identified, was gone. And in his place, a mystery emerged. A mystery that would remain unsolved for years. For over 2 decades, the question haunted the town: who could do something so evil, so unforgivable? Authorities responded swiftly to the discovery, but despite their best efforts, they were faced with one of the most haunting challenges: a complete lack of leads. There were no witnesses, no surveillance footage, not even a clear indication of how long the child had been there. The body of baby Callum, cold and forgotten, was all they had. And yet, it told them so little. With every passing day, the case grew colder, its trail growing fainter with time. The small town of Warrington, usually calm and peaceful, found itself at the heart of a chilling puzzle that refused to be solved. At first, the authorities had nothing to go on. No witnesses. No obvious connections. But one thing seemed clear: a mother had to be involved. The baby had been abandoned, and given its age, there was no other explanation. But why would a mother do something so cruel? Why would someone, who was supposed to protect this tiny life, leave it to die in such a brutal way? In the early stages of the investigation, whispers began to circulate. Some pointed fingers at women in the area, but there was no solid evidence. No DNA. No fingerprints. Not even an eyewitness account that could help authorities identify the person responsible. For years, the case would haunt the community in silence, its unanswered questions drifting in the cool, damp air. But there was always an undercurrent, a growing suspicion. Was the mother someone they knew? Someone in town? Or was this a mystery that was far darker, far more complex than anyone could ever have imagined? Warrington, with its sleepy streets and quiet parks, was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. Neighbors would wave to one another across their front lawns, children played freely, and everyone seemed to have a perfect, peaceful life. But behind this facade of normalcy, there was a secret. A secret hidden in plain sight, a crime so horrific, so unimaginable, that even those closest to it could never guess what was happening behind closed doors. And yet, despite the years of investigation, the case seemed to have disappeared into the shadows. No new leads, no suspects. Life in Warrington continued, as if nothing had ever happened. People moved on. The mystery faded from the forefront of their minds, and the whispers that had once circulated about a mother's involvement grew quieter and quieter. But deep down, those who remembered still had the nagging feeling that someone in their midst knew the truth. Someone was hiding something, and no one was brave enough to confront it. Was the killer still among them? Had they moved on, left the town, or did they walk among them every day, their guilt hidden behind a mask of normalcy? It seemed as though the answers would never come. But, as the years went by, something unexpected happened. A thread, barely visible at first, began to unravel. A single piece of information, a single clue that no one could have anticipated, would finally bring the truth to light. The question of who had committed this horrific crime would soon have an answer, but not in the way anyone expected. And as the story would reveal, not all secrets stay buried forever. And sometimes, the truth is far darker than anyone could ever have imagined. For over 25 years, the truth lay buried, hidden in the dark corners of time, waiting to be uncovered. The case of baby Callum seemed destined to remain unsolved, a ghost story whispered in the streets of Warrington. The years passed, the investigation grew cold, and with it, the memory of a tragic baby boy left to die in the woods. But in 2023, a breakthrough came, one that no one could have foreseen. A revelation that would send shockwaves through the investigation, shatter the peace that had long settled over Warrington, and pull the community back into the horror they thought was behind them. It was not a witness. It was not a confession. It was something far more powerful. DNA. After years of painstaking investigation, detectives decided to reopen the case. With advancements in forensic technology, it became clear that the key to unlocking the mystery lay in a new kind of evidence, DNA. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Joanne Sharkey's surviving son. A routine test, carried out for unrelated reasons, revealed an unexpected connection. His DNA had a match. A match to baby Callum, the infant found dead in the woods all those years ago. The revelation was like a shot in the dark. The connection was undeniable. Joanne Sharkey, a mother living quietly in the same town, had a direct biological link to the child. Baby Callum, the innocent victim of a horrific crime, was her son. And Joanne had spent over 2 decades hiding that secret. But how had this mother been able to hide her dark past for so long? How did she manage to go on with her life, undetected, while carrying the weight of such an unforgivable crime? In that moment, everything shifted. The town of Warrington, which had moved on with its life, was thrust back into the nightmare. Joanne Sharkey, once a quiet, unassuming figure in the community, was now at the heart of a chilling truth. As the investigators pieced the puzzle together, they began to wonder, how did Joanne live with herself for all these years? Was it guilt that gnawed at her every day? Did the weight of her crime haunt her in ways no one could imagine? Or was it something darker, a cold, calculated decision to abandon the child and walk away free? It wasn't just about the crime anymore, it was about the person Joanne had become. In the years after baby Callum's death, she had continued her life. She had married, raised a family, and became a seemingly devoted mother to her surviving children. But behind that facade, behind the walls of her home, the truth was festering, secrets only she knew. But the question remained, what had pushed her to kill her own child? As the investigation delved deeper, the more chilling the story became. Joanne's life was a slow unraveling of silence. She had carried her secret for years, hidden behind closed doors, living with a guilt that no one could see. Her actions, her choices during that time, were shrouded in mystery. Was it the overwhelming pressure of motherhood, a moment of fear, or something far darker that led her to this? And how did she justify it to herself? Every time the investigators uncovered a new layer of her past, the truth seemed even more haunting. The psychological horror of the situation was undeniable. Joanne lived with the knowledge of what she had done, her secret festering in the deepest parts of her mind, while the world around her remained blissfully unaware. The guilt of the crime, the realization that her life, her identity, was built on a lie, must have eaten at her from the inside out. Joanne Sharkey had always appeared to be a woman of normalcy. She had a family, a home, a life that seemed completely ordinary. But in the shadows of her mind, she must have wrestled with her decisions, with the reality of what she had done. Did she ever consider coming forward? Did the guilt ever consume her so much that she almost confessed, only to back away at the last moment? Or did she live in denial, convincing herself that no one would ever know? The more the investigators learned, the more they realized, Joanne's crime wasn't just a horrifying act. It was a psychological prison. The real horror wasn't just in the act of murder, it was in the years of quiet torment, the weight of living with something so unforgivable. Was Joanne's mental state the result of a desperate, fractured moment in her life? Or was she a woman so broken by her choices that she would rather carry the weight of the crime in silence, than face the judgment of the world? We may never truly understand the depths of her psyche. But what we do know is that her actions were not born from a single, impulsive moment. They were a decision, cold and deliberate, buried under a layer of guilt so thick that not even the passage of time could erase it. But the most unsettling thought of all is this: as the years passed, Joanne's secret remained hidden in the dark recesses of her life. No one suspected a thing. No one looked at her twice. As the investigation stalled, she continued to live her life. To raise her children. To pretend that everything was normal. And yet, with every passing year, the question lingered: who knew the truth? Was she hiding from the law, or was she hiding from herself? The town of Warrington would soon have to confront a truth that would shake them to their core, as the slow unraveling of Joanne Sharkey's secret came to light. The past was no longer buried, it had returned to claim her, and she could no longer escape it. After 25 years of silence, Joanne Sharkey's secret was about to be exposed. No more hiding. No more pretending. The day had come when the weight of her past could no longer be buried under the guise of normalcy. It was 2023. The investigation, now fully reactivated, had brought her to the brink. The DNA evidence was irrefutable. The truth was finally within reach. And then, in a moment that would change everything, Joanne made the decision to confess. On the day of her confession, Joanne was brought into a quiet, sterile room, an interrogation room she had never expected to sit in. The walls, cold and unforgiving, seemed to press in on her. But this was no ordinary confession. This wasn't the work of someone simply caught red-handed. This was a woman who had carried her truth with her for a quarter of a century, a woman who had kept the darkness locked inside her for years. In a quiet voice, shaky with the weight of her words, Joanne Sharkey confessed to a crime that had haunted her for decades. "I killed my baby," she whispered, almost inaudible, as if the truth was too monstrous to speak aloud. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, impossible to ignore, impossible to undo. 25 years. And now, Joanne was finally telling the world the truth. The story she had buried deep within her, hidden from every prying eye, every loving glance from those around her. It wasn't just the crime she was confessing, it was the horror she had lived with every day since that night in 1998. Joanne spoke of a hidden pregnancy, one that she kept a secret from everyone. Fear had consumed her, fear of rejection, of judgment, of what others would say. Fear of being abandoned by her family, her community. But it wasn't just fear that drove her actions. It was something darker. Something that twisted her thoughts, pulled her into a place where there was no escape. I was terrified, Joanne admitted, her voice cracking as she spoke. I didn't know what to do. I was alone. And I didn't want to be judged. I couldn't have this baby. I couldn't face it. Her words were heavy with shame, but they didn't soften the horror of what had happened. Joanne described the moment when she made the choice, the moment when the life of her newborn was snuffed out. The moment when a mother became a murderer. In the moments that followed, Joanne's confession unraveled the complex, tragic narrative of what had led to her crime. The pregnancy, the isolation, the overwhelming panic that clouded her judgment. But nothing could excuse what she had done. Nothing could explain away the cold decision to abandon her own flesh and blood. The police listened, taking down every word. They knew what she had done. But they also understood something far deeper, the profound moral implications of her actions. Joanne wasn't a monster. She wasn't a cold-blooded killer who had planned this for years. She was a broken woman, a victim of her own mind, who had made an unthinkable decision in a moment of terror. Still, that didn't change the fact that a life had been lost. A child, helpless and innocent, was no more. And for 25 years, that truth had been hidden. The confession sent shockwaves through the Warrington community. The town that had once been a quiet, peaceful place, now found itself thrust into a nightmare. How could this have happened? How could someone who had once been a neighbor, a mother, a figure of trust, how could she have carried such a dark secret for so long? The news spread like wildfire. People who had known Joanne for years struggled to reconcile the woman they had seen every day with the monster she had become in her confession. Neighbors couldn't believe it. Friends were in disbelief. And her family, her own children, were left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life they had no idea was broken. But the question lingered, how could someone live with themselves after committing such a horrific act? How could Joanne face her surviving children, raise them, love them, while carrying the weight of baby Callum's death on her shoulders? The moral implications were staggering. Joanne's actions had been a cruel betrayal, not just of her baby, but of the people who loved her. Could anyone ever forgive her for what she had done? Could she ever forgive herself? Some may say that there is no redemption for someone who takes the life of an innocent child. Some may argue that no matter the circumstances, no matter the fear, some crimes can never be forgiven. But there was one thing no one could deny: Joanne Sharkey's confession was the beginning of the end. The twisted secret she had carried for 25 years was now out in the open. She could no longer hide from the truth, no longer shield herself from the consequences of her actions. But the impact of her confession would resonate far beyond her. It would leave an indelible mark on the lives of everyone involved, the community, her family, and even herself. And though justice was coming, it could never fully erase the horror of what had happened. The damage had already been done. After 25 long years, the truth had finally been revealed. But as with many stories of crime, the resolution came not with the satisfaction of justice, but with a deep, unsettling ambiguity. Joanne Sharkey, now standing in front of the courts, was forced to confront the consequences of her horrific actions. Yet, for all the lives she had shattered, for all the grief she had caused, the law did not seem to fully punish her. In 2023, Joanne pled guilty to manslaughter due to diminished responsibility, a legal term that acknowledges a lack of mental soundness at the time of the crime. This meant she was not fully accountable for her actions, though she admitted to killing her baby. The judge, perhaps with some understanding of the psychological torment Joanne had endured, decided against a prison sentence. Instead, she was handed a much less severe sentence, one that some would argue felt more like a mercy than justice. Joanne Sharkey's life, which had been hidden under the weight of her dark secret for so many years, was now forever changed. But the question that still loomed large was whether the sentence matched the severity of the crime. Many people, families, friends, and the community at large, were left grappling with the idea that a mother could take the life of her own child and yet not be sent to prison. Was this justice? Or was it an inadequate response to a crime that shattered so many lives? Even now, nearly a year after the confession, there are lingering questions that have yet to be answered. What drove Joanne to commit such an unthinkable act? Was it truly just the fear of judgment, as she had claimed? Or was there something darker buried deep within her, something that she had never fully faced? What were the true motives behind her actions? Was it the overwhelming pressure of being a single mother? Was it the fear of the world's rejection? Or was it something far more sinister that she kept hidden, even from herself? These questions remain unanswered. And perhaps, they always will be. But what's clear is that the impact of her actions has forever altered the lives of everyone who knew her. Her family, once unaware of the horror she carried, now must live with the knowledge of what she had done. Her children, who had loved her, who had trusted her, are now forced to come to terms with the fact that the woman they knew as their mother is also the woman who killed her own child. The psychological scars will never fade. And then there is the town of Warrington, once a quiet, peaceful place, now forever haunted by this dark chapter in its history. The once tight-knit community, where everyone knew each other's name, has been torn apart. Relationships are strained, trust is shattered. What was once a town known for its simplicity now carries a stain that can never be erased. How could they ever forget the woman who walked among them, who lived next door, and who carried a secret so monstrous that it only came to light after a quarter of a century? The reverberations of this crime echo far beyond the courtroom. In every corner of Warrington, in every whispered conversation, the shadow of baby Callum's death looms large. No one will ever forget the night that a mother took the life of her child and concealed it in the cold darkness for so long. The damage has been done, and the town will never be the same. And as for Joanne, what happens to her now? She will live out the remainder of her life with the knowledge that the truth is known, that her secret is no longer hidden. But can she ever truly live with herself? Can anyone who commits such an atrocity find peace within? The final question is left unanswered. For now, her life continues, but it is a life forever marked by the unthinkable. Justice may have been served, but the truth is far from complete. Story 4. 6 women. Each with their own story. Each found dead within a 100-mile radius of Portland, Oregon. Kristen Smith. Janelle Carroll. Bridget Leanne Webster. Ashley Reel. Joanna Speaks. Morgan Wacker. They were daughters, sisters, mothers. Their lives were not connected. But their deaths may have been. Between February and May of 2023, their bodies were discovered, one by one. Some in wooded areas. Others in abandoned buildings or brush off remote roads. All across Multnomah, Polk, Clark, Clackamas, and Marion counties. Police said the deaths weren't related. Different counties. Different circumstances. But the similarities, age, background, the pattern of disappearance, began to gnaw at the public. And at the families left behind. Kristen Smith disappeared in late December of 2022. Her body was found in a wooded area in southeast Portland on February 19, 2023. She was only 22 years old. For nearly 2 months, her family begged for answers. Authorities said her cause of death was undetermined. Then came Janelle Carroll. Found April 8 in a cul-de-sac in the city of Milwaukee. She was 30. The case drew little media attention. No suspect. No official cause of death. No urgency. 2 weeks later, April 24th, Bridget Webster was found in Polk County near a small stretch of highway. She was 31. Described by her family as full of energy, eager to turn her life around. Gone. Then, April 26th, the body of Joanna Speaks was found near an abandoned barn in Ridgefield, Washington. Investigators say she died from blunt force trauma to the head and neck. Her death was ruled a homicide. By the time 22-year-old Ashley Reel was found dead in a heavily wooded area of Clackamas County on May 7th, after being last seen leaving a fast food restaurant in Portland, it became harder to ignore. Still, police remained quiet. No task force. No announcements. No links acknowledged between the deaths. People started asking questions. Why were all these women dying? Why were they being found in remote places? Why were authorities so hesitant to say what the public already feared? And then came the memo. In early June 2023, a leaked law enforcement memo revealed that multiple local agencies were, in fact, investigating potential connections between at least 4 of the cases. They had a suspect. A man with a violent criminal history. Someone who'd walked free not long before the deaths began. His name, Jesse Lee Calhoun. Suddenly, what the public feared had a face. A name. A timeline. Calhoun had been released from prison early in 2021, granted clemency by the governor of Oregon for his work fighting wildfires during his sentence. He had a long record of assaults, gun possession, and drug charges. By mid-2023, he was back in custody, this time quietly. No headlines. No press conference. But by then, 6 women were gone. And people started asking something else. How did no one see this coming? This is the story of a case that Portland tried to piece together, far too late. Of women failed by a system that didn't move fast enough. And of a man who may have slipped through every crack, until it was too late. And as of today, no murder charges have been filed. Portland, Oregon. A city famous for its vibrant coffeehouses, forested trails, and free-thinking spirit. Known for its progressive values, bike culture, and indie music scene. A city where creativity and activism have long danced side by side. But in 2023, while the streets bustled with farmers' markets and craft fairs, something darker was taking shape. Something no one wanted to believe could happen here. From February to May, in what seemed at first like unrelated tragedies, 6 women were found dead. 6 women. Each one discovered in isolated, overgrown, or forgotten corners of the region. Kristen Smith, 22. Discovered in a wooded area in southeast Portland on February 19. Missing since late December. Her body found just off a path near a popular dog park. Police said nothing. The public barely heard her name. Janelle Carroll, 30. Found April 8, in a cul-de-sac in Milwaukee. She had been missing for several weeks. The spot where she was found wasn't far from a residential street, but the way she was left, it made headlines only briefly. Bridget Leanne Webster, 31. Discovered on April 30th in Polk County, off Highway 22, near a rural area of bucolic farmland and brush. She had a bubbly laugh, friends said. She was trying to get clean. Her family had been looking for her for days. Then, 2 days later, April 26th, another body. Joanna Speaks, 32. Found near an abandoned barn in Ridgefield, Washington. Just across the Columbia River. Blunt force trauma to the head and neck. Ruled a homicide. It was the first time anyone used the word. By May, 2 more women would be found. Ashley Reel, 22. Last seen leaving a fast food restaurant in Portland. Her body was found in a densely wooded area in Clackamas County. She had been missing for over a month. Her family said she was the kind of person who wouldn't just vanish. And finally, Morgan Wacker. 27. Her remains were discovered near the city of Salem. She, too, had vanished without a trace. Little information was made public about her case at the time. But she was real. She mattered. 6 names. 6 faces. All women. All within a few years of each other in age. All gone within the same season. The places they were found varied: rural fields, freeway-adjacent woodlands, even semi-urban dead ends. But the trend was unmistakable. Some of them had been reported missing. Others weren't even identified for days after discovery. Media attention trickled in. A few articles. A few hashtags. But the pieces didn't come together. Not publicly. Not yet. The early reports downplayed it all. Police said the cases were not related. The women had different backgrounds. Different counties handled each case. No evidence of foul play in some. No clear suspects in any. But to their families, it never made sense. Why was no one connecting the dots? And more importantly, who was responsible? In a city that prides itself on openness, justice, and reform, 6 women were lost. Quietly. The streets stayed busy. The news cycle kept moving. And beneath the surface, something was unfolding, one detail at a time. This is the story of how Portland tried to understand what happened, and how long it took to ask the right questions. From outer southeast Portland to Ridgefield, Washington, from Clackamas County to Polk County, the victims vanished from all over the Portland metro region. There was no single neighborhood. No shared friend group. No common apartment complex. At first glance, there was no clear connection. And that's exactly what made it so easy to miss. Some women were reported missing. Others weren't identified until after their bodies were found. Police departments, separated by jurisdictions and counties, launched individual investigations. But the conclusions they reached, at least publicly, were the same. No signs of foul play. Cause of death undetermined. Unrelated. Some authorities quietly suggested overdoses. Others chalked it up to tragic misadventure. The story, if there was one, remained buried in scattered headlines and local police blotters. But the families knew better. Kristen Smith's mother said, "My daughter was full of life. She wouldn't just disappear." Bridget Webster's sister was more direct. "She didn't die from her choices. Something happened to her." Ashley Reel's loved ones plastered missing posters across the city for weeks. They had seen what authorities didn't, or wouldn't. And then, the whispers began. On Facebook, vague posts started to circulate. "Another girl missing after leaving a club last night. Someone's offering rides to women, don't accept them. This is starting to feel like something more." In group chats, on Reddit threads, even in Portland-based subcultures, people began to talk. Women shared eerily similar encounters: a man following too closely. A stranger offering help at a bus stop. Someone lingering too long outside late-night venues downtown. Posts popped up under community forums and neighborhood groups. "Ladies, don't walk alone. There's someone out there watching. Stay in pairs. Trust your gut." And buried within those threads, a chilling question. Could this be a serial killer? No one wanted to say it out loud. And yet, piece by piece, the possibility took hold. The details were too close. The timing, too narrow. 6 women. 3 months. All between the ages of 22 and 32. Each one found in a remote or discarded location. Some barely visible from the road. What police departments saw as coincidence. The families, the friends, and the community saw as something else, a pattern. One that seemed to be slipping past the cracks of official silence. But why? In Portland, investigations are often siloed by jurisdiction. City police don't always coordinate with suburban or rural agencies. State police step in only when formally requested. So while one department was dealing with an unidentified body, another was handling a missing person, and another was closing a file without a suspect. No one seemed to be tracking the bigger picture. Until June 2023. That's when the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office made an announcement that rippled across the city. They had identified at least one person of interest connected to the deaths of multiple women. Finally, an official acknowledgement that some of the cases, at least two, might be connected. The name they released: Jesse Calhoun. A convicted felon who had been released early from prison in 2021 as part of a state clemency program. At the time of his release, it had seemed like just another bureaucratic act. Now, it was under a microscope. His name wasn't just appearing in one case, it was reportedly showing up in connection with several of the women. But no charges had been filed. And the police? Still largely silent. What had started as whispers on social media was now out in the open. A slow burn of fear that spread through Portland streets, coffee shops, and late-night corners. 6 women gone. One person of interest. But no answers. And still, no closure for the families. What happened in Portland during those months? And more importantly, why didn't anyone see it sooner? June 6, 2023. An internal law enforcement memo is leaked. For months, officials denied a connection. But now, that's changed. The memo, intended only for eyes within the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, acknowledged what the public had long feared: the deaths of 6 young women in and around Portland may not be random, and someone might be responsible. The public erupts. What was once rumor, speculation, and internet chatter, is now a confirmed investigation. Portland, a city already grappling with a rise in violent crime, begins to feel something deeper: dread. Behind closed doors, detectives had already begun piecing together a chilling puzzle. Through phone records, social media trails, and witness interviews, a name emerges. 38 years old. His rap sheet is long and violent. Assault, burglary, animal cruelty, felony theft. And yet, he was walking free. Released early from prison under a 2021 clemency initiative championed by then-Governor Kate Brown, Calhoun was one of nearly 1,000 inmates given reduced sentences for good behavior and nonviolent records. But his record wasn't clean. Not even close. Court documents later revealed troubling behavior behind bars. Aggression. Non-compliance. And yet, he was still granted release. Each of the women, Kristen Smith, Bridget Leanne Webster, Ashley Reel, Joanna Speaks, Janelle Carroll, and Morgan Wacker, had different lives. Different stories. But one tragic thread connected them. Detectives began comparing locations. Cell tower pings. Social circles. And the name Jesse Lee Calhoun kept surfacing. He knew some of the women. He had messaged others. He attended the same parties, the same bars, frequented the same troubled neighborhoods where several of the women were last seen alive. Then, a breakthrough. A woman, her identity protected, came forward. She said Calhoun once offered her a ride home after a night out. Something about his tone, his stare, it unsettled her. She declined. And she swears it saved her life. Another survivor told police she accepted a ride from Calhoun in 2022. She described a chilling ride through backroads, his demeanor shifting from friendly to controlling. She managed to escape at a gas station after faking a phone call to a friend. These were not isolated stories. Quietly, detectives started compiling them. The image of Calhoun grew darker. By July 2023, Calhoun was taken into custody, not for the women's deaths, but for unrelated parole violations and outstanding warrants. A quiet arrest. No announcement. No press release. Behind the scenes, a task force formed. Detectives across counties now worked in tandem, comparing timelines, forensics, and testimonies. As the news trickled out, panic gripped Portland. Women stopped walking alone at night. Facebook groups exploded with warnings and sightings. Gas stations ran out of pepper spray. Community patrols began circulating neighborhoods, some armed with flashlights, others with blunt weapons. Mothers kept their daughters inside. Nightlife slowed. Uber rides were canceled. Some women went so far as to post their location live online when leaving work or bars. This wasn't just fear. It was survival instinct. Even now, police have not formally named Jesse Lee Calhoun a suspect in the women's deaths. But multiple outlets confirm that he is at the center of the ongoing investigation. Despite no charges directly tying Calhoun to the 6 deaths, Portland's residents began asking questions no one wanted to answer. How did he walk free? Why weren't the warnings heeded? And how many more might there be? By the time Calhoun was back behind bars, 6 women were already gone. And some believe that number could be higher. By late 2023, the city of Portland remained ensnared in uncertainty. Despite mounting evidence and public outcry, Jesse Lee Calhoun had not been formally charged with the murders that had shaken the community to its core. Families of the victims clung to hope, their grief compounded by the absence of justice. Then, in May 2024, a breakthrough emerged. A Multnomah County grand jury indicted Calhoun on 3 counts of second-degree murder and 3 counts of abuse of a corpse in connection with the deaths of Charity Lynn Perry, 24. Bridget Leanne Webster, 31. Joanna Speaks, 32. The indictments marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. Calhoun, who had been in custody since July 2023 for parole violations, now faced the gravity of these new charges. In a press conference held by Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Schmidt, he addresses the media. Today's indictment of Jesse Calhoun marks a significant step toward justice. We acknowledge the profound impact these women's deaths have had on their families, friends, and the community. Despite these charges, the path to closure remained fraught with challenges. Calhoun pleaded not guilty during his arraignment in June 2024, setting the stage for a protracted legal battle. In one of the interviews with the victims' families, Diana Allen, mother of Charity Perry, speaks with a mix of sorrow and determination. Diana Allen: It's been very, very frustrating for us families to not have answers. But I have to trust the process and believe that justice will prevail. The indictments brought a measure of solace, yet questions lingered. Investigations into the deaths of Kristen Smith, 22, and Ashley Reel, 22, continued, with authorities exploring potential links to Calhoun. The uncertainty cast a long shadow over the community. Portland residents began to express their fears and concerns. We used to feel safe here. Now, every dark corner feels like a threat. We're all on edge. The psychological toll on Portland's residents was profound. Reports of unease permeated daily life. Some spoke of eerie sensations while traversing the city's parks, others avoided solitary outings altogether. Portland's expansive forest park, once a sanctuary for nature enthusiasts, became a symbol of the city's collective anxiety. Whispers of strange occurrences deterred many from venturing into its depths. In an interview with a local hiker, eyes darting nervously, he said, "I've hiked these trails for years, but now, there's an unshakable feeling that something's watching. It's irrational, maybe, but it's real." As the legal proceedings unfolded, the community grappled with unsettling questions. Were these the only victims? Did Calhoun act alone, or were others complicit? Why did it take so long to connect the dots? In a footage of community meetings, residents voiced their concerns to law enforcement officials saying, "We deserve transparency. Our daughters, our sisters, our friends, they deserve justice." The specter of these unresolved mysteries left an indelible mark on Portland. The city's vibrant culture was overshadowed by a pervasive sense of vulnerability. Trust in institutions wavered as citizens demanded accountability and reform. This isn't the end of the story. This could be only the beginning. Story 5. Imagine a case so chilling that it gripped an entire community for over 2 decades, with every resident wondering, who did this? For years, the killer was just an enigma, a shadow that haunted their streets, until one day, a clue so simple, so unexpected, would turn the investigation on its head. What if the person responsible had been hiding in plain sight, someone close enough to the victim to shake the very foundations of everyone who thought they knew the truth? Let's unravel the haunting tale of Leslie J. Preer's murder, a 23-year-old cold case that seemed destined to remain unsolved. But in 2024, an unassuming discovery shattered everything and revealed a shocking suspect. Buckle up, because this story isn't just about a murder, it's about the dark secrets that can lie just beneath the surface of even the most familiar faces. On the morning of May 4, 2001, the quiet, tree-lined streets of Chevy Chase, Maryland, were forever altered when 50-year-old Leslie J. Preer's lifeless body was discovered in her home. The brutality of the crime was unsettling. Leslie, a beloved woman known for her warmth and community involvement, had been murdered in a violent and incomprehensible way. She had been stabbed multiple times, the attack so savage it left investigators with a chilling image of an intruder who didn't just want to steal from her, but to silence her. It was clear that whoever committed this heinous act had left behind more than just a crime scene, they had left behind terror. Leslie Preer's death was a blow to the entire community, a local neighbor recalled in interviews. Her sudden and violent murder didn't just shake those who knew her, it left a gaping hole in the fabric of this tight-knit neighborhood. The violence that had come to Leslie's doorstep was something residents had never experienced before. The initial shock was compounded by the disbelief that anyone, let alone someone from their own community, could commit such a brutal act. As authorities arrived at the scene and began their investigation, it quickly became evident that there were more questions than answers. The house, though filled with the signs of a struggle, offered little in terms of clear evidence. In the days following the discovery of Leslie's body, the community was left reeling. People who had known her as a friendly, compassionate woman couldn't fathom how something so horrific could have occurred so close to home. It wasn't just her death that haunted the town, it was the fear that someone, somewhere, was walking freely among them, capable of committing such a crime. Neighbors described the days after the murder as dark, uneasy, and full of whispers. Everyone kept to themselves, one resident would later say. There was a real sense of distrust in the air. We couldn't stop wondering, who would do this? The police were just as perplexed. Montgomery County investigators launched an extensive search for answers, scouring Leslie's life for any possible clues that could lead them to the killer. They interviewed her friends, family, co-workers, and anyone who might have seen something suspicious the night of her death. But the leads quickly dried up. No witnesses came forward, no fingerprints were found, and the DNA left behind at the scene didn't match anyone in the system. For a time, the case seemed to be slipping through the fingers of law enforcement. The murder was labeled a cold case, and the fear that had swept through the community turned into a lingering dread. What made this case even more unsettling was the fact that there was no obvious motive. Leslie had no enemies, no known history of conflict. It was as though the killer had picked her at random. The investigation into Leslie Preer's murder began with urgency, but as months turned into years, the sense of desperation among investigators only grew. Detective Mark Savino, one of the lead investigators on the case, recalled the toll it took. It was a case that stayed with you. Every day, you kept asking yourself, what are we missing? With each passing year, the trail grew colder, and the case became one of Montgomery County's most puzzling unsolved murders. Every time a potential lead was followed, it turned out to be another dead end. No new information surfaced, and the community's initial hope for justice began to fade. Over time, the case became a distant memory for many, something spoken about only in hushed tones at local gatherings. But even as the years wore on, the case never fully left the minds of the investigators, and certainly not the Preer family, who continued to seek closure despite the dwindling chances of a breakthrough. And though the community began to move on, something remained unresolved. The murder of Leslie Prior had become a cold, eerie mystery that continued to cast its shadow over Chevy Chase, a shadow that, as it turned out, would not be so easy to forget. But what if the killer wasn't a stranger at all? What if the answer was closer than anyone realized? Stick around, because what happened next will completely change how we view this case. For over 2 decades, the haunting murder of Leslie Prior remained unsolved. It was a case that seemed destined to fade into the cold, dark pages of Montgomery County's unresolved crimes. Time passed, and the investigation grew stagnant. Detectives had combed through every lead, examined every possible clue, and yet, no answers emerged. As the years went by, the absence of new evidence made it feel as though the killer might never be found. Leslie's family continued to live in anguish, the hole left by her brutal death growing ever larger. Neighbors and friends, once plagued by fear, had tried to move on with their lives, but the question remained unanswered: was the killer still out there? Was the person who took Leslie's life still living among them, hiding in plain sight? The fear didn't dissipate, it lingered, a constant presence in the background. Every neighbor who walked their dogs, every jogger who passed by, every car that drove down the street seemed like a potential threat. The murder may have happened 23 years ago, but it felt as if the ghost of that crime was always just around the corner. As the years stretched into decades, the community's anxiety began to shift from immediate fear to a more uncomfortable, persistent unease. Could it be that the killer had simply gotten away with it? Were the detectives simply chasing ghosts? No one knew for sure, but there was a growing suspicion that the killer was still out there, maybe even living just a few doors down. Just when it seemed like hope was lost, the power of technology, something the original investigators never had, began to change the course of the investigation. In September of 2022, a breakthrough came, not in the form of an eyewitness or a confession, but through the advancement of forensic genetic genealogy. This technology, still relatively new to law enforcement, allowed investigators to re-examine DNA evidence in ways that had previously been impossible. The Montgomery County Police Department, eager to solve the case once and for all, partnered with Othram Incorporated, a cutting-edge forensic lab specializing in genetic genealogy. The DNA collected from the crime scene, which had sat dormant for years, was about to be reanalyzed. It wasn't just about matching DNA to the existing database of criminals, it was about tracing distant relatives, finding genetic matches in family trees, and identifying suspects that were once beyond reach. As investigators eagerly waited for the results, they held on to the hope that this new scientific approach could finally provide the breakthrough they had been desperately seeking. And then, just as the tension began to mount, it happened. A name emerged from the shadows: Eugene Theodore Gliger. The connection was undeniable. A potential suspect had been identified, someone whose genetic lineage had been traced back to the crime scene. However, the discovery was just the beginning. The investigation was far from over, and this new lead raised even more questions. Who was Eugene Gliger? Was he a long-lost relative of someone in the community? Was there more to his story than anyone had realized? As the investigation pushed forward, detectives began to track Eugene Gliger's movements, hoping to catch a break. The suspense reached a fever pitch as they followed the man's every step. And then, on June 9, 2024, a seemingly innocuous moment turned into a pivotal breakthrough. At Dulles International Airport, detectives observed Gliger disposing of a water bottle in a trash bin. To anyone else, it might have seemed like an insignificant act, but to the investigators, it was an opportunity to retrieve the bottle and potentially link it to the crime that had haunted them for so long. They acted swiftly. The bottle was collected, and the DNA found on it was sent for analysis. Days passed, each one stretching the tension in the air just a little bit more. And then, the results came back. The DNA on the bottle matched the blood found at Leslie Prior's crime scene. This was the moment they had been waiting for. It was no longer just a theory or a hope, it was a confirmation. The killer, who had evaded justice for 23 years, had finally been identified. The following days were filled with an electric sense of anticipation as the investigation moved into its final phase. On June 18, 2024, Eugene Theodore Gliger was arrested. The man who had been a shadow for over 2 decades was now in custody, and the community that had been living in fear for all those years could finally begin to breathe again. The details of the arrest were chilling: how a seemingly small piece of evidence, a discarded water bottle, had been the key to solving a cold case that had become a local legend of fear and mystery. The revelation that Gliger was the one who had taken Leslie Prier's life was almost too much to comprehend. The questions began flooding in. How had he managed to stay under the radar for so long? What led him to dispose of the water bottle at just the right moment? And most importantly, what drove him to commit such a brutal, senseless act so many years ago? But here's where the story gets even stranger. Gliger's connection to the case wasn't as clear as it seemed. The more they learned about him, the more questions arose. Was he someone they had overlooked? Was this a case of mistaken identity, or had the real killer been closer than anyone imagined? The revelation of Eugene Theodore Gliger as the suspect in the brutal murder of Leslie Prier was as shocking as it was incomprehensible. In the quiet, tight-knit community of Chevy Chase, Maryland, the arrest of Gliger sent ripples of disbelief through the neighborhood. The fact that the man responsible for the murder had been hiding in plain sight, just a few steps removed from Leslie's own family, was a revelation that no one saw coming. But perhaps the most disturbing part of all was the connection between Gliger and the Prier family. Eugene Gliger, now 44 years old, had not only been a familiar face in the community, he had once been deeply intertwined with the Prier family. For years, he had been in a relationship with Leslie's daughter, Lauren, during their teenage years. The families had been close, often spending time together, socializing, and even celebrating holidays as if they were one. The Priers had known Gliger as someone gregarious, easygoing, and zen in his demeanor, a far cry from what would later be revealed about his dark side. To those who knew him, Gliger's arrest was a thunderbolt. How could the man they once considered part of their family be capable of such a monstrous act? The idea that someone so seemingly harmless, someone who had shared meals and memories with Leslie, could be the one who had ended her life was almost impossible to process. For Lauren, in particular, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. The very person she had once trusted and cared for, the man who had once been a fixture in her life, was now the face of the horror that had haunted her mother's memory for so long. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they began to uncover more about Gliger's involvement, and what they found was chilling. The sense of betrayal was unbearable, not just for Lauren, but for the entire community. How had he managed to weave such a complex web of deception? What kind of person could pretend to be someone else, someone so close to the Prier family, all the while carrying the weight of a heinous crime? The moment the U.S. Marshals apprehended Eugene Gliger, it felt as though the long nightmare was finally over. The arrest was made in Washington, D.C., where Gliger had been living in relative obscurity, far removed from the community where he had once been a part. On June 18, 2024, the Marshals took Gliger into custody, charging him with first-degree murder. He was led away in handcuffs, the weight of his alleged actions finally catching up to him. But the true shock of his arrest wasn't just the fact that he had been hiding in plain sight, it was the effect it had on those closest to him. For Lauren Prier, the news was devastating. She had never suspected that her ex-boyfriend, the young man she had once shared dreams and a future with, could be capable of such a heinous act. The man she had known, the one she had laughed and cried with during their youth, was now the man who had taken her mother's life. In court, Lauren's emotions were palpable as she confronted the reality of Gliger's involvement in her mother's death. "I never thought he was capable of this," she said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "I'm just so thankful that after all these years, there is finally some justice for my mom." Her words carried the weight of decades of heartache, the years spent wondering if they would ever know who had taken Leslie from them, finally giving way to a fragile sense of relief. But there was no easy resolution. The pain of knowing that her former lover was responsible for her mother's murder would never be fully erased. For the community, the arrest was a rude awakening. In a neighborhood that prided itself on its close-knit relationships, the revelation that someone who had once been accepted into the fold could be the perpetrator of such a horrifying crime forced everyone to reevaluate their assumptions. The question that lingered in the air was simple: how well do we really know the people around us? In the days that followed Gligor's arrest, the community was left grappling with a profound sense of shock and betrayal. The news of his involvement in the murder spread like wildfire, and everywhere you turned, people were talking about it, processing the gravity of what had transpired, trying to make sense of the man they had once known. Conversations at coffee shops, grocery stores, and even on the front porches of suburban homes turned to the one question on everyone's mind: how had Eugene Gligor managed to deceive them all for so long? Many members of the community had once thought of Gligor as harmless, almost too harmless. He had a way of blending into the background, always calm, always collected, never raising a suspicion. He was the kind of person people trusted without thinking twice. But now, in the wake of his arrest, it was clear that the person they had once known was a carefully constructed facade. His arrest shattered the illusion that appearances could be trusted, forcing everyone to confront the uncomfortable truth that the most unlikely individuals could be hiding the darkest secrets. The case served as a stark reminder that evil doesn't always come in the form of an obvious villain. Sometimes, it wears the face of someone we least expect, someone who fits seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life, leaving us blind to the potential horrors lurking beneath. The chilling reality was this: the killer had never been a stranger, he had been a part of the Prieur family's inner circle all along. But the mystery doesn't end here. What made Gligor snap? Was there something that triggered his violent actions, or had it always been buried within him? Could there have been signs that were missed along the way? In the wake of Eugene Gligor's arrest, the legal proceedings began to unfold, bringing both a sense of closure and continued tension to the case. Gligor was formally charged with first-degree murder, and he was held without bond as the case moved forward. His arrest had already shaken the foundation of the Chevy Chase community, but now, the anticipation grew as the wheels of justice began to turn. For Lauren Prieur, the emotional toll was far from over. The pain of losing her mother had never fully dissipated, but now, as the man who had taken her life faced the legal system, there was an unsettling blend of relief and dread. The family and the community waited in anticipation for the upcoming preliminary hearing, each moment stretching longer as they braced for what was to come. Would justice truly be served? Would they finally see the full weight of Gligor's actions come to light? The hearing, scheduled for the coming months, would mark the first significant step in the legal battle that had remained elusive for so many years. But even as the wheels of justice creaked forward, there was a deep sense of foreboding. The complexities of the case, particularly the relationships involved, meant that the full truth would be slow to unravel. Leslie Prieur's family and friends, who had spent over 2 decades haunted by the unanswered questions surrounding her death, were now faced with the uncomfortable reality that justice, while a relief, would come at a great emotional cost. The legal system would now have to grapple with the deep, human pain that underpinned the case: a young woman's life taken, a community forever changed, and a family left to pick up the pieces. As the case began its journey through the courts, the community's reflection turned to the larger picture: what had it taken to finally solve this cold case? The breakthrough came thanks to the cutting-edge advancements in forensic technology. The use of forensic genetic genealogy, which had emerged as a revolutionary tool in solving cold cases, was a pivotal moment in the investigation. It had allowed detectives to trace DNA from the crime scene to a potential suspect, a breakthrough that had seemed impossible just a few short years ago. The case underscored the critical role that technology plays in modern criminal investigations. It was the careful application of new science that had breathed new life into a case that had gone cold for over 2 decades. Without these advances, the truth behind Leslie Prieur's murder might have remained locked away forever. But while the technological breakthrough was groundbreaking, it also highlighted the darker side of human nature. The emotional toll on the Prieur family and the community was impossible to quantify. For 23 years, they had lived with a hole in their lives, an open wound that had never been able to heal. The emotional burden of unanswered questions had haunted every corner of the community, leaving people uncertain, paranoid, and fearful. They had been living with a ghost, a killer who was closer than anyone could have imagined. The emotional scars of the case were not just about the brutal murder itself. They were about the profound impact on the Prior family and on everyone who had known Leslie. The case demonstrated just how devastating unresolved tragedies can be, how the absence of answers, the lack of closure, can ripple outward and affect every facet of a person's life. The victim's family, the friends left behind, and even the community at large are all left with an indelible imprint of pain. Leslie's death had been a devastating chapter in her family's history, one that no technological breakthrough could fully erase. Even as justice moved forward, a lingering unease remained in the air. The arrest of Eugene Gliger had answered the question of who committed the crime, but it did little to explain the why. How could someone who had been so deeply woven into the fabric of Leslie's life, someone who had been considered a part of the family, commit such a violent act? And why did it take so long for the truth to surface? The case had opened up a Pandora's box of questions that would never be fully answered. How had Gliger concealed his darkness behind the veil of a gregarious, easygoing persona? What hidden signs had there been that no one had seen before? And perhaps most chilling of all, how many others in the community, people who seemed to be well-meaning, harmless, even trusted, could be hiding similar secrets? The questions were too big to ignore, and they echoed through the streets of Chevy Chase long after the headlines faded. The case also served as a stark reminder of the complexities of human relationships. Appearances, it seemed, could be deceiving. People who seemed safe, trustworthy, and even well-loved could be capable of unspeakable acts. And in some cases, the darkness within them might remain hidden until it was too late. The case had left a lasting impression not just on those involved, but on the entire community. The shock of Gliger's arrest had been profound, but perhaps even more unsettling was the realization that the true depths of human nature, both good and evil, are often veiled by masks. This chilling truth served as a constant reminder that no one, no matter how well you know them, can ever be truly beyond suspicion. As the court dates approach and the case unfolds, there will undoubtedly be more revelations and more questions. But one thing remains certain: the search for justice in this case, although bringing answers, has uncovered a darker, more complex side to humanity. And as the truth continues to unravel, the community and the Prior family will forever be marked by the realization that sometimes, the greatest horrors come from the people we least suspect. As the trial continues, the community waits in anticipation. What will be revealed next? Will the truth about Gliger's motives ever fully come to light, or will his secrets remain buried in the shadows? As the case of Eugene Gliger unfolds, we're left to contemplate the emotional weight that this community must now carry. It's not just the Prior family who have had their world turned upside down. Entire neighborhoods have been rocked by the revelation that a trusted family friend could be capable of such an unthinkable act. But perhaps the most haunting question remains: how do you think the community will cope with the shocking truth about Gliger? Will they ever look at their neighbors the same way again? Can a community, once shattered by a secret so devastating, find a way to heal? Or will they remain forever changed by the knowledge that the most horrific events can sometimes come from the most unexpected places? It's not just about the crime, it's about the ripple effects it has on everyone who was touched by it. What do you think the long-term effects will be on the people who knew Gliger, and on those who were once close to Leslie Prior? Can the trust that was once shared ever be fully rebuilt, or will this tragic event create an unbridgeable chasm? But there's another crucial aspect of this case that we cannot ignore: the groundbreaking role of technology in bringing justice to light. The use of forensic genetic genealogy, which played a pivotal role in solving this case, is rapidly changing the way criminal investigations are conducted. What does this case teach us about the role of technology in modern investigations? In an era where cold cases are being cracked open thanks to DNA analysis, is it possible that many more unsolved mysteries will see justice as a result of these advancements? Or are there still barriers, even with the best technology, that will prevent closure in certain cases? We want to hear your thoughts. Share your opinions and theories in the comments below. Do you think justice will truly be served in this case, or is there more to the story than what we know so far? What role do you think technology will play in solving other unsolved cases? Let's discuss how these advancements are reshaping criminal investigations, and how they might be able to help bring closure to families like the Preers, who have waited decades for answers.